Hi, crime enthusiasts. This is your host Ashita, and the story I have for you today is about Adam Richard Johnson, a lifelong Minnesota resident, 36 years old, and a devoted father of four. In 2021, he became the center of a tragic homicide case that shocked the entire community. Despite facing personal struggles, those who knew him remember Adam as a caring father and a loyal friend. Jojo, the mother of one of his children, described him as someone who always tried to bring joy to those around him and remained an important part of the family. While he had past encounters with law enforcement, likely stemming from struggles with mental health and addiction, his loved ones believe those challenges had no connection to his murder. In 2021, the dismembered remains of Adam Johnson were discovered across various locations in Minneapolis, marking the start of a deeply disturbing investigation. Adam Richard Johnson was a devoted father who, despite his struggles, always sought to bring joy to those around him, especially his children. But his life was marked by battles with addiction, mental illness, and instability. He had no permanent job or address, and just days before his death, he desperately tried to check himself into a hospital for suicidal thoughts. Why was he turned away remains unclear, though overcrowding may have played a role. His loved ones, including the mother of one of his children and several former partners, have spoken out in his defense, insisting that beneath his struggles, he was a kind and caring man. He had no enemies, and in a chilling twist, toxicology reports confirm that Adam was sober when his mutilated remains were discovered across Minneapolis in mid-2021, turning his tragic death into one of the city's most horrifying homicide cases. A gruesome discovery sent shockwaves through Minneapolis. A severed human head, frozen solid, was found resting on a park bench with the word "perv" carved into its flesh. It was a chilling message, deliberate and haunting. Who killed Adam Johnson? And why did they leave such a macabre warning for the city to see? The horror began unfolding on June 17, 2021, when residents of northeast Minneapolis stumbled upon something straight out of a nightmare. Scattered across the neighborhood were human body parts, remnants of a crime extremely disturbing. Trash bags, crudely tied and ominously heavy, were found discarded along sidewalks and in alleyways, their horrific contents spilling out onto the streets. The most unsettling find came outside the Ukrainian American Community Center on Main Street NE. There, a human leg, sawed into pieces, was left in plain sight as if carefully positioned for maximum impact. It wasn't just an act of violence, it was a statement. Someone wanted this discovery to be made. Someone wanted fear to be spread. But the chilling mystery of Adam Johnson's death didn't begin with the gruesome discovery of his body parts scattered across Minneapolis. It started the night before, with an ominous, unexpected knock. At first, it sounded like nothing more than a few abrupt thuds against a window, just enough to jolt a nearby resident out of his evening routine. But then came a louder crash, something forceful enough to shatter the uneasy calm of the night. It started something like a knock, like boom boom smash, the man later recalled, his voice edged with lingering fear. Something about it felt off, But at that time, he brushed aside any sinister thoughts. Maybe it was just a branch hitting the glass. Maybe a bird had flown into the window. But as the seconds passed, unease settled in his gut. Determined to investigate, he grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside with his dog. The night was still, except for the occasional rustling of leaves and distant hum of city life. He scanned the property, moving cautiously, his dog alert beside him. Was it just paranoia? Or something watching from the shadows? What he didn't know then, what no one could have imagined, was within those hours, the quiet street of northeast Minneapolis would become a grotesque crime scene. Body parts would be discovered in trash bags, severed leg would be displayed in public, and a frozen head, marked with a sinister message, would send shockwaves throughout the city. Now looking back, the resident can't shake the feeling in those moments outside his home. Standing beneath the eerie glow of streetlights, he may have been closer to the killer than he realized. Fear has kept him silent, his name withheld for his own safety, because somewhere out there, Adam Johnson's murderer is still at large. Just when the horror seemed to have reached its peak, the case took another grim turn. A little over a month later, in late July, the Mississippi River revealed more of Adam Johnson's remains. Silent, waterlogged evidence of the brutality he had suffered. The river had held its secrets for weeks, but as the summer heat bore down on Minneapolis, the currents eventually surrendered what had been hidden beneath the surface. The discovery only deepened the mystery. Had the killer intentionally disposed of these remains separately? Were they meant to stay lost, carried away by the water? Or had the perpetrator miscalculated, underestimating the river's power to unearth the truth? With every gruesome find, one thing became increasingly clear. This wasn't just a murder. It was a message. Someone had gone to the extreme lengths to make sure Adam Johnson's death was not only violent but unforgettable. And yet, despite the mounting evidence and the city's growing unease, the person responsible remained in the shadows, still unknown, still watching. The Johnson family had been holding on to hope that someone somewhere knew something that would bring finally them the answers that they so desperately sought. But as days stretched into weeks and weeks into months, that hope began to feel more like an unbearable weight. Authorities had made one potentially crucial discovery: DNA found beneath Adam Johnson's fingernails. It was a small but chilling detail, hinting at the possibility that, in his final moments, Adam had fought back. Had he scratched his killer in a desperate attempt to survive? Was this the evidence that would finally crack the case wide open? Forensic testing was underway, but the results had yet to bring any closure to the family. Meanwhile, the terrifying reality, whoever had done this, was still out there. The Johnsons had made the heartbreaking decision to cremate the remains that had been returned to them, but even in death, Adam was incomplete. Not all of his body had been found. Some parts were still missing, lost in the currents of the Mississippi River, hidden away by its killer, or perhaps even strategically placed somewhere yet to be discovered. This agonizing uncertainty meant that they could never truly lay him to rest. The questions surrounding his death, the disturbing way in which his remains were scattered, and the eerie lack of closure all added to the growing unease. And then there was the autopsy. The official report failed to determine a cause of death beyond the horrific dismemberment itself. There were no gunshot wounds, no obvious blunt force trauma, no clear fatal injuries that would explain how Adam had died before being cut apart. It was as if his life had been systematically erased, piece by piece. The only certainty was that Adam had been completely sober when he died. His toxicology report was clean. Whatever struggles he had faced, addiction was not what killed him. Someone else had done this. As the investigation unfolded, a deeply unsettling pattern emerged. The way in which Adam's body was disposed of was anything but random. The method was not just gruesome, but deliberate and calculated. It was as if the killer had planned every grim detail, turning Minneapolis into a crime scene. Some body parts were left in plain sight, arranged as if on display, like the severed leg positioned outside the Ukrainian American Community Center, or the frozen head left on a park bench, grotesquely marked with a slur. Other remains were hidden away, either stuffed into the garbage bags or dumped into the Mississippi River, where they were meant to disappear. The mix of this brazen public staging and secretive disposal baffled investigators. It was theatrical in its horror, as if the killer was both taunting the city and trying to erase the evidence all at the same time. From the moment the first remains were found, police knew that they were not dealing with an ordinary homicide. This was personal. The violent, almost ritualistic nature of the crime pointed to a deep rage and possibly a very specific motive. The gruesome scavenger hunt for Adam's body would continue for over a month, each new discovery pulling authorities deeper into the mystery. By late July 2021, after extensive searches, a torso was finally recovered from the river. With this final, horrifying discovery, investigators believe they had found most of Adam's remains. The grim puzzle was nearly complete, but the biggest question still loomed over the case. Who had done this and why? Forensic investigators have remained tight-lipped about certain key details, but what has been made public paints a disturbing picture of an organized, methodical, and violent crime. The fact that the killer froze body parts, carved a derogatory message, and distributed remains across multiple locations strongly suggested that this was just not a murder. It was a statement. Minneapolis police confirmed from the very beginning that they were treating this as a homicide, not an accident or self-harm. But as terrifying as the crime was, one fact stood out. This was not the work of a serial killer. No similar cases had been reported in the region, and investigators found no evidence of an ongoing threat to the general public. This was not random, not the act of a stranger choosing a victim at random. Adam had known his killer, and the crime had been carried out with calculated precision, intense rage, and chilling forethought. The search for justice was far from over. Investigators continued to piece together the timeline, searching for the missing link, the connection between Adam and the person or persons who wanted him dead. The Johnson family was convinced that the answers were out there, that somewhere someone had information that could finally crack the case, but the fear was keeping them silent. "We are here with nothing. We need something. Anything," Jojo pleaded. The pain in her voice was unmistakable. For Adam's loved ones, this wasn't just a crime. It was a wound that refused to heal. And until someone was brave enough to come forward, the mystery of who killed Adam Johnson and why would remain a terrifying unsolved nightmare. His family remains relentless in their search for justice. They have repeatedly called for anyone with knowledge of Adam's whereabouts or any suspicious activity to come forward. I found this on Reddit, an emotional plea from Adam's aunt, who took to the platform in the hope that someone, somewhere, might have seen something that could finally break open this case. We are still seeking any information regarding Adam or suspicious activity in and around Northeast Main Street and University Avenue Northeast on June 15, 16, and 17 2021, as well as River Parkway and East Franklin Avenue, they urged. Adam's aunt remembers him as more than just a victim. He was family. They had always been close, sharing a bond that stretched back through years of struggle and love. Adam's mother had battled mental health issues and addiction for much of her life, and Adam himself faced similar challenges. He was mentally ill and had been working with a case manager to secure housing, but stability always seemed just out of reach. In the months leading up to his death, his mental state spiraled rapidly. At one point, he showed up at his aunt's home in the grip of full-blown psychosis. Concerned, she urged him to go to the hospital, but he insisted that he had already been there and they couldn't help him. His frustration was evident, and his aunt wasn't sure whether to believe him or not. Before the pandemic, hospitals would place patients on a mandatory 72-hour hold if they were deemed at risk, even when it didn't seem always necessary. But that day, Adam didn't stay. He stormed out, his distress palpable. Minutes later, the police called out his aunt to inform her that they had Adam nearby and asked her to calm him down. When she arrived, he was in an extreme state of turmoil. She pleaded with the officers to take him to the hospital to get him the medication he so desperately needed. His caseworker spoke to them over speakerphone, explaining the urgency of his condition, but the officers refused, saying Adam wasn't clearly stating that he was a danger to himself or others. He tried to explain that he had already told the hospital, but no one was going to check. The police dismissed his aunt's pleas and instead told her and her daughter to leave the scene. After Adam's death, she managed to obtain his medical records. The truth was heartbreaking. In a single month, he had checked himself into the hospital 7 times. Each visit was a desperate attempt to get help. His records showed that he had in fact told medical staff that he was a danger to himself. He had also admitted that he had no home, no food, and yet each time, within just a few hours, he was discharged, with the paperwork stating that he was being sent home, a place that did not exist. It wasn't unusual to go days without hearing from Adam. If 3 days had passed, no one would worry too much. A week, though, would have triggered alarm bells. In the past, the family had reported him missing before, only to be met with irritation from law enforcement. To them, Adam was just another troubled man caught in a cycle that they didn't want to deal with. Time and time again, instead of receiving the mental support he needed, he was locked up, his delusions recorded in court documents but never truly addressed. To his aunt, one thing is painfully clear: the system failed Adam. It failed him repeatedly in ways both small and monumental. It failed him when he was begging for help. It failed him when he was turned away from hospitals. It failed him when officers dismissed the warnings of a family desperate to save him. And ultimately, it failed him in a way that could never be undone. Adam's aunt has been relentless in her fight for justice. She has created a Facebook page dedicated to his case, a TikTok, and every possible social platform to keep his story alive. She refuses to let his name be forgotten or tarnished. From the moment his case became public, she watched in horror as Adam was portrayed as something he was not. False accusations spread rapidly, and strangers online were quick to believe the worst without questioning the facts. Within 24 hours of his name being released, hundreds of people had started slandering him, calling him a predator and blaming him for his own murder. Social media was flooded with cruel comments, people saying good riddance and claiming he deserved what happened to him, all based on unverified rumors. What made it even more infuriating was that these accusations could be disproven with just a few clicks, but few bothered to check. It was easier for them to believe that Adam had somehow brought this upon himself than to acknowledge the horrifying truth a mentally disturbed, sadistic murderer was still out there, walking free. Despite everything his family has done to seek the truth, the public response has been largely indifferent. There has been no real quick outpouring of support, no widespread call to action. His aunt refuses to accept that no one knows anything. Someone does, and she is determined to keep pushing, keep rattling cages until answers come to light. She refuses to believe that everyone is as heartless as the person who did this to Adam. What disturbs her most is the way Adam's murder has been treated, both by the public and law enforcement. His killer didn't just take his life. They discredited his body, froze parts of it, dismembered him with precision, and scattered his remains like some gruesome display. And yet, many people act as if the fact that this case remains unsolved is no big deal. They fail to see the threat that still lurks in their own community. Adam's aunt will never stop fighting. She will continue to demand justice, not just for Adam, but for his children, his family, and all those who loved him. She refuses to let his memory be defined by lies. The system may have failed him, but she won't. There has been speculation about possible gang involvement or cartel connections in Adam's murder, but at this point, those are just unverified rumors. His ex-girlfriend, Jojo, has strongly dismissed the idea that his death had anything to do with drugs or unpaid debts. Another circulating theory is that a group of people may have witnessed the crime but are too terrified to come forward, fearing retaliation. As for the motive, investigators have struggled to pinpoint an exact reason behind the brutal killing. Given the methodical dismemberment and the staged nature of how his remains were disposed of, it's possible the killer or killers wanted to send them a message. This level of violence suggests personal rage, humiliation, or a power play rather than random attack. If Adam had a conflict with someone in his life, it may have escalated to a gruesome act of revenge. Another theory is that he was targeted because of his vulnerable state. His mental health struggles made him an easy victim for someone with sadistic intentions. There is also the chilling possibility that his murder was purely for the sake of inflicting pain. The mix of public display and hidden disposal of bodies suggests that the killer wanted control over the narrative, to evoke fear or to manipulate how the crime was perceived. Whether it was a calculated act of dominance, a deeply personal vendetta, or something even more sinister, one thing is clear. Whoever did this to Adam wanted to be dehumanized in death as much as they disregarded his life. Here's my take on what might have happened to Adam. Like everyone else, I have my own theories, but the truth is, this case is unsettling because it could have been completely random. Adam was struggling, battling homelessness, addiction, and mental health issues. That alone put him in an extremely vulnerable position. He was part of a population that is often ignored, overlooked, and sadly, easy prey for someone with violent intentions. If someone was looking for a target, Adam wouldn't have been difficult to find. I can't shake the feeling that the killer was hunting for someone to murder. The fact that the word perv was written across Adam's forehead makes me think it was an intentional attempt to throw off the investigation, to create an illusion that Adam had done something to deserve this. It's a classic misdirection meant to muddy the waters and make people question the victim instead of focusing on the killer. This person went out of their way to make the crime scene as shocking as possible, scattering Adam's body parts across the city, placing his severed head on a public park bench. That kind of behavior isn't about just getting rid of evidence. It's a statement. It screams for attention. Someone who does that isn't afraid of being noticed. They want the spectacle, the fear, the control over how the crime is perceived. That tells me that Adam was most likely picked at random and the killer made such bold moves because they believed that there was nothing tying them to the crime. But there's another angle, one that's more personal, more rage driven. Whoever did this wasn't just interested in killing. They wanted to dehumanize Adam. The level of dismemberment, the preservation of his remains, those details suggest something beyond just violence. It hints at deep-seated anger, humiliation, or even shame. Sometimes killers like this externalize their own darkness, projecting it onto their victims as a way to justify what they are doing. What if Adam unknowingly triggered something in this killer? Maybe he represented something they despised within themselves. Maybe the word perv wasn't about Adam at all, but about the killer's own self-hatred. What stands out to me the most is the fact that Adam's remains were preserved before being disposed of. That single detail makes me think this wasn't an impulsive crime. The police profile suggests the same thing. This was calculated. The killer didn't just snap, they planned. They took time to preserve the body, to place it in specific locations, to make sure the message was seen. That kind of patience isn't common in spur-of-the-moment crimes. This wasn't someone who lost control in a fit of rage. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing and took their time doing it. That to me suggests they are more functional in day-to-day life than we might expect. They likely move through society unnoticed, hiding whatever anger or sickness they carry until they find someone that they can unleash it on. Someone unprotected, someone society won't immediately fight for. If this person is ever caught, I wouldn't be surprised if they have a long, unreported history of domestic violence or abuse, a pattern of controlled but escalating aggression that eventually led to this. Another thought that lingers my mind is whether Adam was killed for getting in the way of something. What if this wasn't just about him being a convenient target, but rather a punishment? Maybe he unknowingly challenged the wrong person. What if he tried to help someone, maybe a sex worker, or maybe another vulnerable person, and that act of defiance sealed his fate? Some killers are driven by control, and nothing sets them more off than feeling like someone beneath them has taken power away, even in the smallest way. If Adam stood up for someone, if he tried to intervene in something he didn't fully understand, it's possible that the killer just waited long enough for him to let his guard down before striking. There's still so much that doesn't add up. So many unanswered questions. But one thing is clear. Whoever did this didn't just want Adam dead. They wanted to send the message, but the question is to whom? At the core of this tragedy is not just the horrific way Adam was taken from this world, but the way his name was dragged through the mud in the aftermath. Instead of demanding justice for a brutal, calculated murder, the police became fixated on rumors, unfounded, baseless lies that painted Adam as something he wasn't. And that's exactly what the killer wanted. They left behind misleading clues. They staged his remains in a way that was meant to create a narrative. And worst of all, it worked. Think about it. Who dismembers a body, preserves the remains for weeks, and then strategically scatters them in public spaces? This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a random violence. This was deliberate. This was methodical. And the person responsible isn't dangerous. They are someone who wanted the world to see what they did. Someone who wanted attention. The word perv scrawled across Adam's forehead. That wasn't a message for Adam. That was a message for us. It was meant to make people look the other way, to believe that maybe, just maybe, Adam deserved what happened to him. And shockingly, a huge part of the public fell for it. Within 24 hours of his name being released, people were calling him a predator, saying good riddance, and dismissing his death as if it were nothing. No investigation, no second guessing. Just blind belief in a lie that conveniently absolved everyone from having to care. But let's be clear. Adam was not what they tried to make him out to be. He was a father, a son, a man struggling with homelessness, addiction, and mental illness. Things that made him vulnerable, not dangerous. And vulnerability is exactly what predators seek out. Maybe this was a serial killer looking for an easy target, someone they thought no one would miss. Maybe Adam saw something he wasn't supposed to, interrupted a crime scene, defended someone in danger, and paid the ultimate price. Maybe his killer had deep-seated rage, something personal, something boiling under the surface that finally exploded in the most gruesome way possible. And the way the body was displayed, that wasn't just about disposing of evidence, that was the point, the act of dismemberment. The placement of remains in locations where they would definitely be found. The way he was preserved, just being discarded, this was a message. One thing is certain, this wasn't the work of someone who just snapped. This wasn't an impulsive crime. This was someone who planned and enjoyed the power of deciding when and how Adam's remains would be discovered. Someone who wanted to shock people. And yet, despite all of this, law enforcement has made no arrests. There has been no real push from the public because the people who were supposed to care, who were supposed to be outraged, were too busy believing a false narratives that was handed to them by the killer. It's sick, it's infuriating, and it's exactly why justice for Adam has to happen. Someone knows the truth. Maybe it's the people who have whispered about witnessing something but are too afraid to come forward. Maybe it's someone who overheard something in passing. Maybe it's even someone who dismissed their own gut feeling because they didn't want to believe they knew a monster. But silence only protects the person who did this. Adam didn't deserve this. His children didn't deserve this. His family, the people who loved him, deserve answers. This case cannot be another cold case, another unsolved mystery that fades from the public's mind, because Adam's killer is still out there. And if they did this once, they'll do it again. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to subscribe to my podcast on Spotify and YouTube so you never miss an update. I appreciate you joining me today. Have an amazing weekend ahead. Until then, stay safe, crime enthusiasts.